Some people spend years feeling like they are behind. Like somewhere along the way, life took a wrong turn and they weren't paying close enough attention to notice. And now they look around, at their days, at their habits, at the person staring back at them in the mirror, and they feel this quiet, uncomfortable feeling they can't quite name. Not sadness exactly. Not failure exactly. Just distance. A distance between who they are and who they always believed they would become. And here is the truth that most people never have the courage to face: that distance doesn't come from bad luck. It doesn't come from difficult circumstances. It comes from small, quiet decisions made daily over years, decisions to wait, to settle, to drift, and the moment you truly understand that, everything changes. That is the lesson. Not just for today. For your life. Let me ask you something. Think about the last time you felt genuinely alive. Not entertained. Not distracted. Genuinely alive, full of direction, full of purpose, full of that feeling that you were becoming something. When was that? Last year? 5 years ago? Some people, if they're honest, have to reach back to their teenage years to find that feeling. And they tell themselves it was youth that made them feel that way. They tell themselves that's just how it is when you get older, that you trade passion for responsibility, that you trade fire for practicality. But that's not true. And somewhere inside you, you know that. Jim Rohn spent decades studying why some people grow and most people drift. He didn't study it from a comfortable distance. He lived the drift himself. As a young man, he was broke, embarrassed, and completely without direction. He had reasons for it, excuses he carried like armor: the economy, his background, the town he was born in. And one day, a man named Earl Schoaf said something to him that cracked his whole world open. He said, "Mr. Rohn, the problem is not your circumstances. The problem is that you haven't yet become the kind of person who can change them." Not cruel. Just true. And Rohn said later that in that moment, something shifted inside him permanently. Not because the words were complicated. Because they were honest. The distance between who you are and who you could become is not a mystery. It is a reflection. And reflections don't lie. Think about this. There is a pattern in how people lose themselves. It rarely happens all at once. Nobody wakes up one morning and decides to abandon their dreams, to stop growing, to let their best years slide quietly past them. It happens in layers. It happens through compromise. Through one small surrender followed by another, each one reasonable on its own, until one day you look at the total and realize you've traded your life for comfort, for routine, for the approval of people who aren't even paying attention. You see, most people never realize that drifting is an active choice. They think of drift as something that happens to passive people, to weak people, to other people. But drifting isn't about weakness. It's about the absence of direction. You can be busy every single day, genuinely busy, genuinely exhausted, and still be drifting. Busy and directionless is one of the most common traps in modern life. Motion is not the same thing as progress. Effort is not the same thing as growth. And the years don't stop passing just because you haven't decided where you're going yet. There was a man, let's call him David. A hard-working man, a husband, a father. He worked long hours. He provided for his family. By every external measure, he was doing what he was supposed to do. But David had carried a quiet sense of loss for years. He had always wanted to build something of his own. Not for money. For meaning. But he kept telling himself, not yet. After the kids are older. After the mortgage is smaller. After things settle down. And life kept not settling down, the way life tends to do. And the years passed. And one evening, sitting at his kitchen table while his children slept, he realized that not yet had become probably never without him ever making that decision consciously. That moment of realization, that is both the most painful and the most important moment a person can have. Because that is the moment when the drift becomes visible. And once you can see it, you can change it. Ask yourself, what have you been postponing? Not the big dramatic things. The quiet ones. The book you've been meaning to write. The skill you've been meaning to build. The conversation you've been avoiding. The version of yourself you've been promising to become someday when conditions are right. What is the thing you keep circling back to in your private thoughts, the thing that hasn't gone away no matter how many years have passed? Because here's the truth, the things that stay with you are trying to tell you something. They are not random. They are not distractions. They are signals from the part of you that hasn't given up yet, the part that still believes there is time, that still believes you are capable of more than you've settled for. Jim Rohn used to say that the same wind blows on all of us. The wind of circumstance, of opportunity, of difficulty. It's the same wind. What determines where you land is not the wind. It's how you set your sail. And most people never set the sail at all. They just float. And they call it fate. They call it luck. They call it God's plan. They give it every name except the one that's true, a choice. I want to talk about the mind for a moment, because this is where the real battle is happening. Not in your bank account. Not in your career. Not in your relationships. In your mind. Specifically, in the story you carry about who you are. Every person walks around with a private story about themselves. About what they're capable of. About what they deserve. About what's possible for someone like them. And that story, most of the time, was not written by you. It was written by your upbringing. By the first time someone laughed at your idea. By the parent who meant well but pushed their own fears into your foundation. By the years of small evidence you collected, moments when you tried and failed, moments when you were told to be realistic, moments when you watched someone else succeed and quietly decided that was not for you. That story has been running in the background of every decision you've made. Every time you almost started and then didn't. Every time you talked yourself out of something before you even began. That was the story doing its work. Quiet, invisible, powerful. And here's what most people never realize, the story is not the truth. It is a habit of thought. A pattern worn smooth by repetition. And like any habit, it can be replaced. But first it has to be seen. And seeing it, really seeing it, without excuses, without softening it, requires a kind of courage that very few people are ever willing to summon. There was a young woman once, sharp, capable, full of ideas. From the outside, everyone could see what she was. From the inside, all she could see was the gap between where she was and where she thought she should already be. And so instead of building, she spent years preparing to build. Studying. Planning. Researching. Waiting until she felt ready enough, credible enough, certain enough. And the preparation became a comfortable substitute for the actual thing. Because preparation carries no risk. Preparation feels like progress. But preparation without action is just fear with better posture. Her turning point came from a conversation with an older woman she admired. The older woman said, "I spent 10 years waiting to feel ready. Then I spent 10 years wishing I had started when I first thought about it. Don't buy the same regret I bought. Start before you're ready." Readiness is a myth. That is the painful, liberating truth. Readiness is not a state you arrive at. It is a state you grow into through action. Through imperfect, uncomfortable, uncertain action taken before you feel prepared. Every person you admire for their courage was terrified when they first began. The difference is that they moved anyway. Now understand this, finding yourself again is not about going back. People say that. I want to find myself again. I want to go back to who I was. But the person you were before the drift is not the destination. You can't go back, and more importantly, you shouldn't want to. What you want to find is not the past version of yourself. It is the version of yourself that never stopped being possible. The one that the drift covered over. That version is not behind you. It is ahead of you. It exists only in the future, and only if you walk toward it. Jim Rohn spoke often about the concept of personal development as the highest form of work a human being can do. Not because skills matter more than relationships. Not because success matters more than love. But because the quality of everything in your life, your relationships, your contribution, your joy, your peace, is determined by who you are. And who you are is not fixed. It is a garden. And gardens require tending. If you haven't been tending yours, the weeds don't announce themselves. They grow quietly, slowly, in the spaces you stopped paying attention to. Until one day you walk through and realize you can barely see the garden anymore. But the garden is still there. Underneath. Waiting. Let me ask you something that might sit uncomfortable for a moment. What are you using to avoid yourself? Because almost everyone has something. Work, sometimes, the noble addiction that looks like virtue from the outside. Social media. Food. Constant noise, constant stimulation, constant reasons to not sit alone with your own thoughts for more than 3 minutes. Because sitting alone with your thoughts means encountering the questions you've been running from. It means hearing the voice that asks, is this the life you meant to build? Is this the person you meant to become? Most people cannot tolerate that voice. So they bury it under noise. And the noise grows louder every year. And the voice doesn't disappear, it just gets quieter. And the distance grows. Here's the truth about that voice, it is not your enemy. It is the most honest part of you. It is the part that hasn't given up, even when you have. The part that still believes in the version of you that hasn't been built yet. Instead of running from that voice, what would happen if you ran toward it? What would happen if you sat in the quiet and let it speak, and then, instead of explaining it away, you listened? There was a businessman once, successful by most definitions, who came to a crossroads in his 50s. He had built the company, provided for his family, earned the respect of people in his industry. And he felt completely empty. Not depressed. Empty. Like the whole structure of his life was real, but the meaning inside it had gone missing. He went to talk to someone he trusted, an old friend who had lived simply but deeply. And the friend asked him one question: when was the last time you did something not because it was useful, but because it made you feel like yourself? The businessman sat with that question for a long time. And he realized that for over 20 years, every decision he had made had been filtered through usefulness, value, return on investment. Even his relationships. Even his time. Everything had been optimized. And in optimizing everything, he had eliminated the very things that made him feel human. The art he used to make. The long walks. The conversations that had no agenda. He had called it growing up. What it really was growing away from himself. He started again. Not by burning everything down. By adding back, slowly, the things he had quietly removed. And within a year, the structure of his life looked almost the same from the outside. But from the inside, everything was different. Because he was different. That is what finding yourself looks like in practice. It is not a dramatic gesture. It is a quiet, daily recommitment to the things that make you more yourself rather than less. You see, Jim Rohn's deepest teaching was not about money. It was not about time management or goals or the 5-year plan. At the root of everything he ever said was one idea: you become what you think about, what you do daily, and what you are willing to tolerate in yourself. The outer world is always a reflection of the inner world. Always. Without exception. And so if you want to change what you see around you, in your relationships, in your finances, in your energy, in your sense of meaning, the only place to begin is inside. Not by beating yourself up. Not by reliving every mistake. But by looking honestly at the gap between who you have been and who you are capable of becoming, and deciding, quietly, firmly, privately, that the gap is no longer acceptable. Not to anyone else. To yourself. There is a version of you that already knows all of this. That version has known it for a while. It sits in the back of your mind on the quiet nights, patient and waiting, not judging you for the delay, but never fully silent either. That version of you is not some fantasy. It is not some impossibly perfect alternative self. It is simply you, with the drift removed. You, with intention restored. You, with the daily, unglamorous commitment to becoming someone slightly more worthy of your own life than you were yesterday. The path back to that person is not complicated. That is the thing people resist most. They want the return to be dramatic. They want a moment of revelation so powerful it does the work for them. But the path back is made of mornings. Made of small, consistent decisions that accumulate over months and years into a person you no longer have to search for. Because they will simply be you. Jim Rohn once said something so simple it sounds almost too small to matter. He said, work harder on yourself than you do on your job. Not your career. Not your reputation. Yourself. Your mind. Your character. Your discipline. Your emotional intelligence. Your capacity for honesty with yourself. Work on that, consistently, relentlessly, and the rest of your life, every part of it, improves without you trying to fix it directly. So let me bring this home. You are not lost because life is cruel. You are not lost because you made too many mistakes. You are not lost because you started too late or were dealt a difficult hand. You are not lost at all if you are willing to be honest. You are simply drifting. And drifting is not a sentence. It is a state. States change. The moment you decide to set your sail, not when the storm passes, not when conditions improve, but now, today, with the circumstances exactly as they are, is the moment the drift ends. Not dramatically. Quietly. Internally. In the place where all real change has always begun. Ask yourself one final question, and sit with the answer honestly. If you keep living the way you have been living, same habits, same thoughts, same daily drift, where will you be in 5 years? Not where you hope. Not where you wish. Where will you actually be? And then ask, is that acceptable? Because if it isn't, and you will know the answer, then something in you has already decided. There is a version of you that keeps waiting for the right moment. And there is a version of you that understands, finally, that the moment is always now, and it has always been now, and it will only ever be now. One version stays comfortable and calls it wisdom. The other version begins, imperfectly, uncertainly, without guarantees, and calls it life. The drift is over the moment you decide it is. Not because your circumstances change in that moment. Because you do. And when you change, truly, deeply, from the inside out, you will look back on this moment not as the beginning of something difficult, but as the day you stopped being lost. Not because you found some perfect destination. Because you finally started moving in the direction of who you were always meant to become. That is enough. That has always been enough. Begin.